I think that the so-called primitive people kind of had a window to upstairs, to the spiritual world. They had shamans, people trained to do these things. We call it intuition, but they just knew these truths. They could access these truths in a different way than we can. We do things by science. And I think these primitive people could do that. Now, they've lost this and we've lost it. We can't do that anymore. But that's why it's so important that we get that information from them before it disappears completely.
Welcome to the Wise Traditions Podcast, sponsored by the Weston A Foundation for Wise Traditions in Food, Farming, and the Healing Arts. We are your source for scientific knowledge and traditional wisdom to help you achieve optimal health.
I'm your host, Toda Labrada Gore. This is episode 100. We are so excited. And our guest today is none other than Sally Fallon Morell, the head of the Weston A. Price Foundation. Sally is a well-known speaker and authority on wellness. She's the author of Nourishing Traditions, Nourishing Broth, and Nourishing Fats. Today, in celebration of this 100th episode, we asked her your questions. Sally talks about everything from soup to nuts, no foodie pun intended. She answers questions regarding her understanding of what constitutes a good diet and how that's changed over the years, where wise traditions actually come from, and what to do about dietary deficiencies. She even answers a question about an ancient remedy for treating parasites. You are going to get something out of this episode, but more than anything, you're going to love the up-close and personal nature of our conversation with an unconventional figure in today's confusing nutrition landscape. Before we kick into the conversation, we want to celebrate with you these 100 episodes. We are going to be giving away a Wise Traditions Foodie Swag Bag. It is a collection of food from some of our most loyal sponsors, and we're putting it together just now. So the main thing you need to know is that if you want to win it, all you have to do is post on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram the words, "I love the Wise Traditions podcast because," and then you give your reason. Hashtag WAPF, and you will be entered to win this foodie swag bag. The deadline for getting this done is Sunday, October 22nd, so don't wait. Just go ahead and tell us why you love the Wise Traditions podcast. Use the hashtag WAPF, and you will be entered to win. Good luck. Hey, we want to pause also and remind you that the Wise Traditions podcast depends on your support to keep going. That's right, and now is a great time to give. The Weston A. Price Foundation is conducting a fundraising campaign, and giving couldn't be simpler. Just go to the website, westonaprice.org. Click on the button that says Support Our Many Projects, and pick an amount of any size. You can actually click on podcast and let them know that that's what you care about, and help us meet our goal of $15,000 by the end of the month. This would go so far in helping keep this show as sustainable as your local farm. And thank you. Welcome to Wise Traditions, Sally.
Thanks, Hilda. It's great to be back, and congratulations to you. 100 podcasts. That's fantastic.
Isn't it exciting?
Yes. And, we're approaching 1 million downloads for these podcasts. So, yeah.
It's the value of this content, and so I have to give a shout out to the foundation, which you started, and this is why we wanted to have you on, because you have so much wisdom yourself to impart. So I asked people, what do you want to hear from Sally? What are your questions? So we got a lot of questions from listeners on Instagram and on Facebook and by email, and I want to start with one of the best ones, which was just, how were you introduced to the work of Weston Price? Did you stumble across the book in a library? Did a friend tell you about it? What is your journey from the book to the foundation? Also, that's a follow-up.
Well, actually, I think it started in 1973. It was after my daughter was born, and I was cleaning out the attic, and I found a bunch of books on health, and I started reading them. I was very interested in the subject, and at that time I was very interested in Edgar Cayce and his stuff on health. So I actually don't remember who told me about Weston Price, but they said, that's the book you should read. And I bought it at the Yes Bookstore on Wisconsin Avenue in Washington, D.C. Yes, so that's when I found Nutrition and Physical Degeneration.
Oh, what an impactful book.
So that was 1973. Mm-hmm.
And then how did you go from that book to starting the foundation?
Oh, well, that happened a lot later. That really happened a lot later. When I read the book at the time, I just had my first child. I went on to have 3 more children. And it was a confirmation to me that I could cook the way I like to cook, which was with butter and cream and everything. And of course I kept adding things like cod liver oil and liver and all these good things. But it just was the book that I thought, well, I'm going to cook this way for my children.
Mm-hmm. So it was kind of like a seed was planted that you started living out.
Yes.
And then later
I could prove to myself that it worked, because all my kids had straight teeth and I needed braces. So yeah. But then it wasn't until 1990 that I got the idea to write Nourishing Traditions. So that's 17 years later. During that period, I met Mary Enig, and she and I thought we really need a consumer-oriented organization, but that kept up with the science.
Oh, well, and hearing you talk makes me think of the woman who wrote us on Instagram. Her little name is Real Girls Eat Fat or something like that. And she was asking like, oh, should I write a book? How do I get this message out there? But she's a young mom. And so it sounds to me like you waited before you move forward.
Yes, and I always caution the young mothers, don't jump into anything. Your most important thing right now is feeding your kids. Mm-hmm. And I didn't start writing Nourishing Traditions until my youngest child was in school full time. And then it was just something I did a little bit every day. It took me really 9 years to write Nourishing Traditions. Meanwhile, what would be very easy is to promote the Weston A. Price Foundation, to give our materials out, maybe be a chapter leader if you have time. Mm-hmm. And I've just put a little plug in here about my book, Nourishing Fats, which came out last year and which I feel really sums up what we know about fats at this time.
Excellent. You're right. So there's no need to reinvent the wheel in a way. You might say just use what's at hand until that seed grows into fruition for you, maybe.
Right.
Excellent. So the next question I want to ask you is from Michael Dolling. And Michael wanted to know, has your conception of what constitutes a good diet changed significantly since you first started the foundation, and if so, how?
Actually, I think the 11 guidelines that we came up with, have held up pretty well. I just wrote the conclusion to my next book, Nourishing Diets, and I based that conclusion, I structured it around those 11 points, and they really have held up quite well. Now, we've learned a lot of new things during that period. I think one of the most important things we learned is the importance of arachidonic acid, which is an omega-6 fatty acid that you get in animal fats, mm-hmm. and how important it is to balance that with the omega-3 fatty acids. People are overdosing on omega-3s these days.
Right.
So I think they've held up pretty well. I know in my own case, if I follow these guidelines, I feel fine, and if I don't feel good. So.
And you are the picture of health, Sally. It's true. You're like living proof that this works. So that's exciting. Well, that's interesting to know. So it's really kind of confirmed rather than changed.
Yes. I mean, we've added a lot more information. Some of the interesting work is being done in Italy with people with celiac disease. And they find that if they give them genuine sourdough bread, they can eat that bread without any problems. So we've had tremendous confirmation about the proper preparation of grains. We've had an explosion of information about gut health and good gut bacteria, so that pretty much confirms the fermented foods. So yes, what we've seen happen is a confirmation, scientific validation.
But let's say something came up that didn't confirm. What would the foundation do?
Yes, well, we would look at that very carefully, and if we felt that we should change something, we definitely would. And not only that, we would let everybody know.
Absolutely.
Let's just say that we found out that, well, it's sort of hard to think of what.
I know it's hard because the 11 principles are so good.
Well, I can give you an example. So broth, we're big advocates for broth, but it has come to our attention that very often the autistic children or children with tremendous food sensitivities don't do very well on broth. And so we have said, then you do a very short cooked meat stock instead until they get used to the gelatin and so forth in broth. So there's a very good example of we've had to qualify our recommendation in that case.
Well, it's good to know that you keep doing the research. That's a branch of the foundation, right? It's research, activism, and education. So to make sure, because you don't want to be steering people in the wrong direction.
Absolutely not. I would not be able to sleep at night if I felt that we were steering people in the wrong direction. So.
Yeah, no, that's good to know. Now, Sandrine Perez, who is the head of Nourishing Our Children.
It's a project of the Weston A. Price Foundation.
She asked, if you were to meet Dr. Price, what would you ask him?
I would ask him if he had any further thoughts about how these people knew what to eat. Because there's a very interesting passage in his book where he says, these people know things that we don't know. It gives me chills every time I say this. These people know things that we don't know, and they need to come to us as missionaries, not the opposite way. And so he says, how did they know these things? And he gives two explanations. One is, was there a civilization that's disappeared that knew these things and has just been passed down? And he wrote this when he was in Peru, of course, with all the ruins and everything. There's the obvious examples of a very high civilization that had disappeared. The second explanation he gives was that they were like scientists. They made observations and then they could see what worked and what didn't work. But I don't think either of those is correct. I think that the so-called primitive people kind of had a window to upstairs, to the spiritual world. They had shamans, people trained to do these things. We call it intuition, but they just knew these truths. They could access these truths in a different way than we can. We do things by science. And I think these primitive people could do that. Now, they've lost this and we've lost it. We can't do that anymore. But that's why it's so important that we get that information from them before it disappears completely. So this is why we've sent people like yourself off to Peru and Africa. Part of the reason is to tell them, stick with your food traditions, but the other part of it is to ask them what those traditions were before they disappear, because most anthropologists never thought to do that. And you just have to kind of glean these little nuggets from all the writings, and we really need to go to these people who are still so-called primitive and ask, or just even traditional, ask them what their traditions were, because they're very valuable. And then we can show the scientific validation. There's nothing wrong with science, but you can't get complete knowledge with science. You have to have the other way of knowing things.
That's a great point. I did think about this a lot when I was in Peru. These traditions didn't come from nothing. They had to come from something. How would they know that fish eggs were perfect to feed pregnant mothers or young children?
And to have healthy babies. They weren't doing scientific studies.
No.
They just knew. And they almost laugh at you when you ask them, why would you have to ask me this? Isn't it obvious to everyone that fish eggs give you healthy babies? But they knew in a different way than we know. We've lost that way of knowing.
And we need to rediscover it.
Yes, and that's the great journey, is to completely separate ourselves from that spiritual world, to learn science, to learn to think in the scientific way, and then to be able to recapture that way of thinking.
Yeah, that's fantastic. All right, so speaking of traditional peoples, Michael Morell, a member from Virginia, asked this question. Do you believe that the bulk of Native Americans died of disease even though they ate extremely well?
You know, this is a really good question, and it's something I've thought about a lot, because when the Native Americans got smallpox, it wiped out 95% of the villages. Whereas in Europe, when they got smallpox, it might have wiped out a third of the people, but it wasn't so catastrophic. And part of the reason that they died was they knew it was contagious, or they thought it was contagious, and they would be abandoned. The sick people were abandoned. No one would go near them, and they actually died of thirst. They died. They didn't have enough to drink, and they couldn't move to get the water. Now, there's lots of theories, and one theory is that the Native Americans did not live with animals. They did not have domestic animals like the pigs and the cows in their houses. You know, in Europe, the animals lived in the house with the people. So that's one theory. I have some thoughts on this. First of all, I believe the smallpox was, and that was what killed everybody, was the smallpox. It was brought in with the blankets. It was from the bed bug bites. And there was a doctor in Texas who actually proved that if you cleaned up the blankets and the beds, and people didn't get smallpox. And they always talked about the blankets, remember? It wasn't that the germs were lurking on the blankets, it was the bed bugs. That still begs the question, why they died so quickly. And, the immunologists will say, well, they had no antibodies to smallpox, and that's because they weren't with animals. I also think that because these people grew up with foods that were really easy to digest and healthy, they actually didn't have to have so well developed an immune system or so well developed a pancreas or adrenal glands or whatever was involved. And so instead they had perfect eyesight and perfect musculature and perfect teeth, okay? So that part of their body didn't have to develop. Whereas for us, it has to develop because we're challenged from birth because the food's not perfect and so forth. It's just a theory of mine.
Interesting. Well, thank you for answering that. I know you've read a lot about the Native Americans, haven't you?
So I'm just finishing up my next book, Nourishing Diets. It was a fascinating book to write, and the Native Americans were fascinating people. They knew instinctively things to eat. They had special foods for special times of life, and they knew how to prepare their grains and knew that animal fats would give them fertility, for example. Same all over the world. The people living the traditional so-called primitive way had a different way of knowing things.
When we come back, we're going to talk about things that we can eat to shore up our immune system. We want to pause now and just remind you that our Wise Traditions Conference is coming up November 10th through the 13th. You are going to want to be there. It is going to be filled with all kinds of speakers, including like 37 new ones. And Sally herself will be there giving a master cooking class. So look at your schedule, figure out how you can get there, use those airline miles that you've accumulated, do what you have to do to get there. And I just want to tell you, this conference is unlike any I've ever been to. I have been to health conferences where they throw supplements from the stage and they've got the flashing lights and all this. This conference is very low key in a good way. It's intimate, it's genuine. You can connect with any speaker or person of your choice. You will eat really good food that is prepared in the Wise Traditions fashion. I mean, you're just going to love it. So go to wisetraditions.org and register today, and I look forward to meeting you in person in Minneapolis. Also, don't forget that it is time for our 100th episode celebration, and we have this little opportunity for you to win the Wise Traditions Foodie Swag Bag. All you have to do to enter is get on your favorite social media platform, either Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, and say, I love the Wise Traditions podcast because. Fill in the blank, use the hashtag WAPF, and you will be entered to win all kinds of food from some of our most loyal sponsors. The deadline for entry is Sunday, October 22nd at midnight. So participate and good luck. So now we want to talk about things that we can eat to shore up our immune systems, given that we are so attacked, as you said, at every turn almost. Peanut One Red from Instagram asked, how do you make sure you're getting enough iodine in your diet if you're using sea salt and drinking raw milk? In other words, she's not using, I guess, salt that has iodine in it or certain, processed foods. She's concerned that her kids might not be getting enough.
Or eating kelp. I wrote an article on iodine. It's on our website, westanaprice.org, and questioning how much iodine do we really need. And Price actually looked at this, and I think it was 1 milligram per day that he found. He didn't find soaring amounts of iodine. I think some of these protocols are up to 15 milligrams a day. I also expressed concern about seaweed because, yes, seaweed's a great source of iodine. It definitely is an important food in many cultures, but seaweed's also high in bromine, and bromine blocks iodine. So it is a really good question. I would say if you've got a thyroid disease or if you have breast cancer or breast problem, you probably need more iodine. And I would look into some of the old ways of doing this. One was to put Lugol solution on the skin. and see how quickly it absorbed. And of course, that's a treatment as well, because you're getting the iodine through the skin. And I do think that's a safer way than just eating tons and tons of iodine-rich food.
Oh, okay.
Meanwhile, butter, of course, is a great source of iodine, and seafood, and your unrefined sea salt has iodine in it, so that should be enough. Yeah.
That's great. All right, so now Crystal Luzardo from Miami had this question about parasites. She said, what natural treatments do you know of to take care of parasites? Do you know of natural remedies? Have you heard of pure gum spirits of turpentine, she asked.
An ancient remedy for treating parasites. Well, first of all, a few things. Most people get parasites through their feet. That was well known. They had a little crack in the foot. They were walking in mud or whatever, living on farms, and they got the parasites through their feet. And this is why I'm a little bit concerned about this whole business that we should be going barefoot all the time. In the old days, public health officials went out and got people to wear shoes, and that cut down on the parasites.
Oh, that's so funny.
So I think we need to be careful about, if we're going barefoot, where we're going barefoot. There are people who say that a certain amount of parasites is necessary, that they have a job that they do in our guts, but of course we don't want them to be overgrown. Now we get to an area where I am not an expert, but I do know that in the past people used to do the parasite cleanse in the spring. I had an African American tell me that his grandmother boiled up mullein on the stove and made them all take it for parasites. For worms, he said we had to take that every spring for worms. So there are methods of getting rid of them. Another is walnut shells. I haven't heard of pure gum spirits of turpentine, but maybe it is. And when they always say when you do one of these parasite cleanses, you do it twice. You do it once and then you do it 10 days later to get the eggs. But that's definitely traditional to do a parasite cleanse in the spring. And I think if you are living on a farm going barefoot, it might be a good thing to do.
Right, yeah. You got to be careful.
Oh, and one more thing I'd like to say about that. I've had doctors tell me that they've seen parasites in people on low salt diets. Because without enough salt, you can't make hydrochloric acid. And hydrochloric acid is your first defense against parasites coming in through the gut.
Wow, it's fascinating. Again, the traditional diet pulls us through,
If you
get sufficient salt,
right,
that will help you in fighting them.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, I have a friend who was very sick, and she said some kind of parasite cleanse, I don't know what she did, but really helped her get some of these out of her body. So it bears looking into.
Yes. No, I would say, if especially if you're losing weight, they used to have advertisements for tapeworm, for weight loss. You would swallow tapeworm eggs and then you'd lose weight. I don't recommend this.
No, goodness, no, we don't want it that bad.
But I think if you're losing weight or not feeling well, and check the stool too, because that's how they come out. So.
Yeah, when I interviewed Robin Shirley from Take Back Your Health, she was talking about curing Lyme, actually, and getting healed from Lyme. But she said that parasite cleanse was an important part of the protocol she recommended. So fascinating. All right, let's go to another question. Pear Daughter from Instagram also asked, what are the nutritional differences between natural sweeteners like honey, maple syrup, and agave? What are the differences between those, and what is the value of pollen in our diets and honey?
Okay, well, first of all, in that list, honey, maple syrup, and agave I would not call a natural sweetener. Now, it is possible that you could get the natural agave syrup, but that is not what agave is today. Agave is, they take the starchy root and they put it through the same kind of enzymatic process that they do for corn to turn the glucose in corn into fructose for high fructose corn syrup. So agave is the same process. You end up with a fructose that's not quite exactly like natural fructose, and all your body can do is send it to the blood to raise your triglycerides or send it to your body fat. You cannot use that fructose for energy. And the thing is, high fructose corn syrup is about 55% sucrose. Agave is about 90% fructose. So please be careful with agave. And I know that they say, oh, this is natural from the flowers of the agave plant. If it were true, that would be fine, but they lie. They lie. So
why are we not surprised?
Now, honey and maple syrup, they're quite different sweeteners. I think maple syrup, the beauty of maple syrup is it's got lots of minerals. because this is what the tree is bringing up from the roots.
Uh-huh.
Also, there have been some really interesting studies on maple syrup recently showing that it has some interesting complex carbohydrates that are very good for digestion. Now, honey is kind of a magic food, I think, if it's really unfiltered with all the pollen and everything and not heated. It has lots of interesting enzymes, pollen, vitamins in the pollen, and minerals as well. So you want to make sure that your honey is really pure, really unfiltered, not pure, but we used to get honey in this jar, and it was really raw honey. You couldn't see through it, and it used to say on the jar, "Does your honey get hard? We certainly hope so." And then it said, "We think see-through is obscene." So that's what you want. That's the kind of honey you want.
Because the pollen really has something added that you want in there.
Yes,
right?
yes. Yeah.
I don't know anything about honey, but I'll start looking into it myself. There's some more questions about what we include in our diet or what we can do to make up for dietary deficiencies. Megan Tucker asked, if you can't get fresh seafood or fish roe, what should you add to your diet for the nutritional aspects that those foods provide?
Well, cod liver oil for sure. There's a very nice product which is desiccated oysters. You can get in capsule form. Probably can get gravlax or smoked salmon by mail. That's a very good product. Yeah, and that's actually, they're sort of fermented, so that would be another suggestion.
Oh, okay, so get it by mail. Maybe that would be the way to go. Yeah. Someone was asking about first foods for baby. Some said that we recommend that they start with a runny yolk with added salt and a little liver, but some parents in the community that Sandrine runs, Nourishing Our Children, say that a fair number of babies vomit it and they follow the instructions exactly. Do you have any idea why? Yeah,
we've had a number of reports of babies not liking that egg yolk. Actually, the best way to try it is just fix a fried egg for yourself with a little bit of runny yolk and just dip your little finger in it and put it in baby's mouth. See how baby likes that. So start very slowly. And we always say, well, just wait till they're a little older and try again. Sarah Pope found that if she mixed the egg yolk with pureed liver and salt, there was no problem. So it might be something about the texture of the egg yolk also. But we definitely recommend that pureed liver, egg yolks if baby will tolerate, pureed meats be the first foods. And I wrote a series of blogs on this called Bringing Up Baby, which are on my blog, nourishingtraditions.com.
That's great, because we're told, or at least we used to be told, to feed our baby rice cereals, certain little cereals.
And all plant foods, avocado, rice cereals, applesauce, squash. And that's not what baby needs. Baby's going to cry all the time, and you would too if all you got was squash or applesauce.
That's so funny. Well, people cry when we tell them that as a foundation we don't recommend coffee. So one question posed had to do with that. Chocolate and coffee are traditional foods, they said, and there are benefits to both. Why don't we recommend them?
Well, chocolate and coffee come under the category that you find in many cultures of foods with alkaloids in them that have mind-altering effects. Now, coffee stimulates the adrenal glands to produce adrenaline, and it wakes you up, but you do that every day and you can get adrenal exhaustion. And in my own experience, my health improved by leaps and bounds when I got off of coffee. So it's like taking a hammer to your adrenal glands. Now, is it the worst thing you can do? No, of course not. And some people find that they actually just can't function without a cup of coffee in the morning. I'm not going to say don't drink coffee.
Right.
I think much better not to ever start. So you don't want to give coffee to your children or all the other sources of caffeine, soft drinks and all these things.
I guess chocolate would fall in that
Well,
category.
Chocolate has caffeine in it, or a caffeine-like substance, but chocolate has the added thing, the alkaloids that raise dopamine. And this is why you feel better when you eat chocolate, especially if you're depressed. And again, is it the worst thing in the world? No, but is it a good idea to always be stimulating your dopamine unnaturally? And the answer is no, this is not a good idea. And we think there's much better ways of regulating your dopamine, like broth, for example. Chocolate's hard to digest, and it does have a lot of sweetener in it. Even, dark bitter chocolate has a lot of sugar in it. And I think the question is, well, what if it has honey in it? But, that's not going to be your beautiful, raw, unfiltered honey that's in that chocolate. So the Aztecs, where we got the chocolate, they added it to food. So they would add a little bit to a sauce, like the mole sauce.
Yeah, mole. I love mole.
But they also had a bitter drink that they drank, and they drank it every day, and some of the warriors were drinking it all the time. And I'd like to point out that whole civilization was conquered by a few dozen ragtag Spanish men who weren't drinking chocolate. So, and what happened was chocolate then came to Europe, and it started out as a beverage, and the upper class women were drinking chocolate for breakfast, and it became all the rage. And of course, it substituted for other foods that could really nourish you. So,
good point. Well, this has been a nourishing conversation. I think we'll just wrap it up with one more question here. Chelsea McCabe on Instagram said, Sally, we used to live in Maryland and we visited your farm often. She sounds really sweet. Now she says where she lives, raw milk is unheard of. And she said they have found some kind of farm that practices biodynamic farming, but they have to ice bathe the milk to the recommended temperature before selling it. So she wants to know, is that still okay, or should they avoid it?
Well, I'm a little confused by the question. No matter what you're doing with the milk, you have to chill it down right away. And you do it with an ice bath. In other words, you put the milk in this case, in Small Farm, you put the milk into bottles, and then you immediately put it into an ice bath or very cold water to chill it down quickly. So that's just recommended practice, and that of course makes the milk separate, which is a good thing. That shows you it's not homogenized, and you just shake it a little bit before you drink it. So what I don't know from that question is whether that milk is raw, and hopefully it is raw.
Right, because that's going to be the most nutrient dense.
Yes, the most digestible.
Yeah, so many things.
Yes, right.
I've seen your presentation, so I know I have all these things running through my mind. But yes, we recommend raw milk at the foundation because it's not a dead product, you know, it's a living product.
I just came back from visiting my grandsons who are brought up on raw milk and cod liver oil. Very low sugar diet. It's not what I would call perfect diet. No child's diet is perfect, and you have to be a little bit flexible with children. But I think the raw milk, the good fats, cod liver oil, minimize the sugar. It's like the four-legged stool that's the good basis. And it's just so fun to see really healthy children. They're just so lively and sweet, and they're like little rough and tumble little lion cubs, and speak beautifully, no problems, and no problem sleeping. This is the goal.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, Sally, thank you for your amazing work with the foundation, and thank you for letting us launch this podcast so we can get the word out to more people. I hope everybody enjoys this 100th episode.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Hilda.
My guest today was Sally Fallon Morell, the head of the Weston A. Price Foundation. To find out more about the Weston A. Price Foundation, just go to westonaprice.org, or simply go to that page and click on the blogs and podcasts link. Go to the show notes for this episode, and you will find highlights from this episode and other resources that Sally mentioned. Hey, and a big thank you to Podcast Village. You guys are the wind beneath my wings. You help keep this show going on so many levels. I appreciate you greatly, so thank you. Hey, and last but not least, if you guys want to follow me personally, I'm at Holistic Hilda on Twitter, at Holistic_Hilda on Instagram, and I've got my website, holistichilda.com. I do put out a newsletter at least once a month with some updates on how to live the healthy, holistic journey. So stay tuned and stay close. Take care, guys.
Thanks for listening today. Our website, westonaprice.org, offers free resources to address your questions and support your journey to health. You'll find videos, articles, and brochures covering a broad variety of health topics. Wise Traditions is brought to you by the Weston A. Price Foundation for Wise Traditions in Food, Farming, and the Healing Arts. The content of this podcast is provided for informational purposes only and is not intended as a substitute for medical advice.